This week was brutal. Ground opening up, swallowing people alive, 14,700 dead in a plague, Moses striking the rock in anger, Aaron dying on the mountain, Matthew's viral meltdown, heavy stuff, real consequences, devastating failures. But there's something we need to understand about what happened and why it matters for us. Korah wasn't just disagreeing with Moses. He was challenging God's authority because Moses wasn't self-appointed. God chose him. God called him. God anointed him. When Korah said, "Who made you boss?" he was really saying, "Who made God boss?" That's why the response was so severe. That's why the ground opened. That's why fire came out. God was defending his own authority, his right to choose leaders, his structure, his order. Romans 13 says, "There is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted." This doesn't mean leaders are perfect. Moses wasn't, Aaron wasn't, Matthew wasn't. But God places people in positions of authority, and challenging them isn't just a horizontal conflict. It's vertical. It's challenging God. Does this mean we never question leaders? No. Scripture has examples of godly people respectfully questioning decisions. Nathan confronted David. Paul confronted Peter. But there's a difference between respectful accountability and rebellious undermining. Korah wasn't seeking clarity. He was seeking a coup. That's rebellion. And rebellion against God-appointed authority is rebellion against God. But here's what makes this week so important. Even God's chosen leaders fail. Moses did. The man who spoke with God face to face, who parted the Red Sea, who brought water from rocks. He failed. 40 years of complaining, 40 years of whining, 40 years of ingratitude. And finally, at a rock in the wilderness, Moses snapped. "Must we bring you water out of this rock?" He took credit for God's work. He acted in anger instead of obedience. He struck instead of spoke. And it cost him everything. Think about that. Moses spent 40 years getting Israel to the edge of the promised land. 40 years of sacrifice, of intercession, of leadership. And one moment of anger disqualified him from entering. That feels harsh, excessive, unfair, but God's point is clear. Leaders are held to a higher standard. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. James 3:1. Moses represented God to the people. When he took credit for the miracle, he misrepresented God. He made it about human power instead of divine grace. And that's not a small thing. The same principle applies today. Leaders who claim credit for what God does, who act in anger instead of wisdom, who misrepresent God to people. There are consequences, real ones, lasting ones. But here's what's beautiful. God didn't destroy Moses. He didn't cast him aside. He forgave him. Moses continued to lead Israel, continued to intercede, continued to serve. He just couldn't enter the promised land. And honestly, that might have been mercy, because Moses was exhausted, burned out, crushed under the weight. Remember when he said, "Kill me now"? The man was drowning under the pressure. The consequence released him. It set a boundary. It said, you can lead them to the promised land, but you don't have to lead them in. Someone else will do that. Someone younger, someone fresh, someone named Joshua. Same with Matthew. The consequence looked like loss. No national platform, no scaling the movement. But it was also freedom. Freedom from crushing expectations, from constant travel, from the weight of being everywhere and everything to everyone. God said, you can pastor Riverside, you can serve your community, but the bigger work, I'm giving that to someone else, not as punishment, as mercy, releasing you from a burden you were never meant to carry. Sometimes consequences are the kindness, the redirection, the correction that saves your life. Paul says it this way, the Lord disciplines the one he loves. Hebrews 12:6. But the most important truth from this week is this. God's work doesn't depend on any one person. Moses couldn't enter the promised land, but Joshua did. The people still got there. The mission still succeeded. God's plan still worked. Matthew won't lead the national movement, but Josh will. The work will scale. The vision will expand. The mission will advance. Because it was never about Matthew. It was always about God. This is both humbling and comforting. Humbling because you're not indispensable. God can accomplish his purposes with or without you. Your failure doesn't stop his plan. But comforting because the pressure's not all on you. You can fail and God's work continues. You can be disqualified from one thing and still be used in another. Your mistake doesn't end the mission. Paul understood this. He wrote, "I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow." 1 Corinthians 3, 6-7. Moses planted, Joshua watered. God made it grow. Matthew planted, Josh will water. God makes it grow. You plant or water. Someone else continues. God makes it grow. That's the pattern. That's the promise. That's the hope. Moses failed. Aaron failed. Every leader in Numbers failed. Miriam challenged Moses. Korah rebelled. The people complained constantly. Even Moses struck the rock in anger. Every human leader eventually fails. Because we're human, finite, weak, sinful. We crack under pressure. We act in anger. We take credit we shouldn't. We fail. But there's one leader who never failed, who never took credit he didn't deserve, who never acted in sinful anger, who never misrepresented the Father, who carried an impossible weight and never broke. Jesus. Hebrews compares Moses and Jesus. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, but Christ is faithful as the Son over God's house. Hebrews 3, 5-6. Moses was faithful, but he was a servant. And servants fail. Jesus is the Son, and the Son never failed. Moses struck the rock in anger. Jesus was the rock struck in our place. They drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. 1 Corinthians 10:4. Moses couldn't enter the promised land. Jesus entered the ultimate promised land, heaven itself, and opened the way for us to follow. Moses interceded for the people. Jesus is our intercessor. He always lives to intercede for them. Hebrews 7:25. Every human leader points to Jesus. Moses, Aaron, Joshua, David. They all foreshadow the perfect leader, the one who doesn't fail, the one who completes the mission, the one who brings us all the way home. When your leaders fail, and they will, remember, they're human. Forgive them. Pray for them. But don't put your ultimate trust in them, because they'll eventually let you down, not out of malice, out of humanity. Put your trust in Jesus, the leader who never fails, the rock who was struck for us, the high priest who intercedes forever, the one who brings us all the way into the promised land. If you're a leader, you will fail. It's not if, it's when. The pressure will build, the complaints will wear you down, and one day you'll snap. You'll take credit you shouldn't, you'll act in anger, you'll misrepresent God. When that happens, own it, confess it, accept the consequence, and trust that God's work doesn't depend on you. He'll raise up the next leader. The mission will continue. And honestly, you might need the release. If you're following a leader, remember they're human. They will fail. When they do, respond with grace. But also remember, your ultimate allegiance isn't to them, it's to Jesus. Follow human leaders as they follow Christ. But when they stop following Christ, you follow Christ. Don't rebel against God-appointed authority, but also don't worship human leaders. There's a balance. Honor them. Submit to them. Pray for them. But trust Jesus alone. If you've failed, God still uses broken people. Moses led for 40 years after the golden calf incident. He led faithfully for decades after that. One failure at a rock didn't erase 40 years of faithfulness. It just set a boundary, a consequence, a redirection. Your failure doesn't disqualify you from everything. It might disqualify you from one thing, but God can still use you, still work through you, still accomplish his purposes in you. Moses didn't enter the promised land, but he's still in the Bible, still honored, still remembered, still used by God to teach us. Thousands of years later, we're still learning from him, from his faithfulness and his failure. Your failure isn't the end. It's a chapter, a hard one, a costly one, but not the end. This week taught us, rebellion against God-appointed authority is rebellion against God. Handle it carefully, respectfully, but don't undermine what God has established. Leaders are human and will fail. Expect it. Prepare for it. Respond with grace, but keep your ultimate trust in Jesus. Consequences are real, but they're often mercy, releasing you from a burden. redirecting you to what you were actually meant to do, protecting you from crushing under a weight God never intended you to carry. God's work continues beyond any one person. You're part of the story, but you're not the whole story. Plant your seed, water what you can, then trust God to make it grow through whoever He raises up next. Jesus is the only leader who never fails. Moses pointed to Him. Joshua pointed to Him. Every leader points to Him. The perfect high priest, the faithful son, the rock that was struck for us, the leader who brings us all the way home. Next week, we finish Numbers, then Deuteronomy, Moses' final words, his farewell address, his last chance to get it right, his legacy to the next generation. See you tomorrow.